Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. So what today's topic is going to be is getting started with record trigger flows. We're going to be exploring the declarative development part of Salesforce. So again, here's my information. I'm a principal instructor here at Salesforce. I'm also an application architect. And yeah, I've been in this industry, well, it's been more than 3 decades, I will say that. There is my LinkedIn information at the bottom of the screen, so feel free to link in with me. And I've worked in a lot of different aspects of the IT industry. I have an undergraduate and a master's degree in computer science. I've worked in the financial industry, real estate industry. I've worked in mainframe environments, desktop environments, writing desktop software, worked in your typical client server environment. I've been part of startup companies in San Francisco. And I also spent a great deal of time, about 8.5 years, as a New York City math teacher, which is a very interesting experience. Got back into the industry as a Java instructor and was introduced to Salesforce almost 10 years ago and absolutely fell in love with the product. The reason for that is that, as software engineers, we spend so much time rewriting the same sort of infrastructure over and over again. But now here is a product where the infrastructure is placed. Now we're just able to extend it with our own functionality. And so that's what brings us here today. Like Teresa said, I do travel globally teaching all of our development classes, both programmatic, Apex development, and our no-code programming languages using Flow. I teach Lightning Web Components as well as our integration courses. Great, so let's get started here. And before I really get into record trigger flows, right, these are the topics I want to cover. Just make sure we're pretty set with some standard Salesforce basics. Then we'll talk about what is flow, where it fits into the picture, and of course, if we're going to be talking about certain types of flow, I must discuss DML. We'll get into record trigger flow basics and concepts like global variables, and then demos. Everything is about demos. So I have a couple set up. I've also made sure that we will have time for Q&A at the end. All right, so make note of any questions that you have. I'll be happy to answer them. Right. So what's important to understand when we're working in Salesforce is that we're working in a multi-tenant cloud, right? And so that changes the paradigm a bit, right? And the way I like thinking about a multi-tenant cloud is think about a building that has a whole bunch of identical apartments in the building, right? Each apartment is your dedicated space. You're a tenant in that building. Right, so let's say Noltic, they have an org, they're one of the tenants. Maybe you've spun up a developer org, that's a tenant. Maybe you created a playground in Trailhead, that's a tenant. But what does that mean? All the tenants in the building have shared resources, right? In a building, you share access to electricity, access to heat, building maintenance, that sort of thing. In a Salesforce org, everyone is sharing access to our servers, to our database, to our support, to all of our objects. Right now, one of the things that happens when, let's say you move into an apartment, right? It's empty. What do? You customize it. You bring some furniture in, you put some artwork up, bring in a kitchen supplies, right? You make it your own. Same thing with a Salesforce org. Whether you're getting an org or a company gets an org, the org is customizing it to fit its own, business needs. Right now, again, let's go back to, the apartment setting. Right? Let's say you want to try to drive a car into your apartment. Can you? Well, of course not. What's stopping you? There's a wall there, right? It's a constraint. In Salesforce, our constraints are called limits. We have lots of different types of limits that allow each tenant to have access to the resources they want, well, when they need them. And that's where it's important. And it's important to understand that we have a concept called governor limits that constrain what happens when some sort of operation runs, right? And so that's really why knowing how to program, not just declaratively, but programmatic with code on Salesforce is fundamentally different from other environments, because we have to be aware of our limits. So when we're on the Salesforce platform, again, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, Salesforce is set up in a series of layers, much like an onion or an ogre, right? So I'm told that most of us are developers on this call. You may recognize this, right? The layers are the user interface, business logic and automation, and data, right? Well, what design pattern is that? You could all scream it out. 3, 2, 1. Model view controller. Absolutely. Salesforce adheres very strictly to model view controller, where the view is the user interface, everything you see, right? The controller is our business logic and automation. That's where our record trigger flows and Apex triggers are, amongst other automations. And the model, that's the database, right? Salesforce is a cloud that sits on top of basically a very highly customized Oracle database. It's important to understand that we have these 3 layers so that when you're listening to users or you're analyzing requirements, you think, oh, okay, it sounds like my users want some new ways to capture data. I need to make changes to the model, to the data layer. And, oh, they need to transform the data that they're entering so it could fit well on a report. Oh, okay, I need to have some automations. Maybe I need a trigger to fire to change my data. So just to get a little bit more into the detail of what appears on each layer, we have what we're calling now the no-code side of our model and our pro code. No code, we used to call it declarative, point and click, but we have marketing people and they keep changing the names of our technologies. So no code means declarative, point and click. Pro code means writing code. But what does that mean at each layer? Well, when we're dealing with the UI, right, on the declarative side, right, the no code side, that's our app tabs, screen flows, page layouts, lightning apps. When we've exceeded what we could do declaratively, then we have our custom solutions, and that's where Lightning components come in. Lightning web components or components. On the controller layer, right, the business logic, right, on our no code, we have, again, our flows, which we're going to be talking about. We also have validation rules, and then we have this soon to be deprecated functionality called process and workflow rules. And it's still important to understand how those work, because you may get a job where you're supporting an organization that may have been around for a while, and they may have a whole bunch of processes and workflows in place that you need to support, right? Shortly, you won't be able to write new processes and workflows, but we're not turning them off. They're still going to be part of an organization. And then finally, we have the data model. So on the no-code side, right, when we're in the Salesforce setup menu, we're able to create objects, fields, and relationships, right? On the pro code side, you can actually interact with your objects through the metadata API. And in fact, if developers on the call, if there's anyone who's using Visual Studio Code in SFDX, you may have had experience with this. Right, cool. Now, when you're coming up with a Salesforce solution, there's a rule we tend to follow, where a good Salesforce solution up until now has followed this 80-20 rule. That means 80% click, 20% code, right? And that seems, scary to developers. I mean, developers, we're hammers and the world is a bunch of nails. We want to bang them in. But you have to be aware that we have limits in Salesforce. And that if you do as much as you can with your solution in a no-code manner, then Salesforce is responsible for managing those governor limits, and you have a more solid solution. And when I'm about to talk about record trigger flows, that sort of changes our paradigm, where no longer is it an 80-20 rule, but with record trigger flows, I'm starting to say it's 90-10, where 90% of your solutions can be done with a declarative technology. So what that means is there's a symbiotic relation between writing code and coming up with no-code solutions, and both are important. And this is a great place for a developer to be, because a developer can see both worlds and they're able to identify, oh, this is where I have to write code, but this is where I could offload my solution in a declarative manner, so I could just focus on what my code needs to be and let Salesforce handle all the other solutions. All right, so what is flow? I have a colleague, you may have sat at, you may have been on a webinar with him a month or so ago, Andres Perez, AKA El Toro. And I brought him up to speed on flow. He was a hardcore developer, and he used to give me so much grief about promoting flow. He said, oh, I just want to write code. Until I wrote a flow class, and he learned it, he ramped in it, and he came to me and said, Stuart, I owe you an apology. Salesforce has finally lived up to the expectation and came up with a point-and-click programming language. And that's what flow is, right? Flow allows you to come up with really complex automated business solutions that allow you to meet your customer's need. So flow is built in a tool called Flow Builder, and an executing instance of a flow is called a flow interview. So there's a whole bunch of different types of flows that are out there. We have a screen flow. A screen flow looks like a wizard. It's a way where you can have a very simple way of having a series of screens strung together to perform some sort of business logic. It can interact with the database, interact with Salesforce functionality, perform notifications. You can even have integrations performed with your screen flows. Now, your scheduled triggered flows are analogous to batch apex, or if you're in the IT industry, think about the use case where, oh, I'm working for a banking system, and every Friday night at midnight, I need to reconcile our opportunities, right? So I want a job to run every Friday night at midnight, or a job to run every Monday morning at 3 a.m. That's what we mean by scheduled triggered flows, right? An operation that runs based on a calendar date. So we have, that was our scheduled trigger flows. Now, record trigger flows are analogous to apex triggers. They run implicitly when a DML event takes place on the platform, right? DML event, database manipulation language, that's when we're making persistent changes to the database. And I'm going to have a slide that's going to go a little deeper into that next. And auto launch flow was sort of a legacy flow where you would call these from a process, right? Back in the day when people wrote processes, right? That was your standard, point and click automation tool, but there were some things a process couldn't do, like delete a record. So what you would do was create an auto launch flow to delete a record, and you would call that imperatively from your process. Next, we have a process event trigger flow. So I'm just going to go very high level because I could talk hours about platform events, right? We have our platform event trigger flows. Basically, a platform event is something that follows what we call a pub-sub architecture, where you have a publisher that sees an event, creates an event message and publishes that event message to a bus, right, or a channel. On the other side of that, you have a subscriber that's listening for this platform event. And once that platform event is sitting on the bus, sitting on the channel, it will read that platform event and perform some operation. A platform event trigger flow is a subscriber in that hub sub architecture. And we can write those in flow, just like we could write those in Apex. So again, there's a lot that we can offload to the no-code solutions. All right. Thumbs up. People with camera, you can give me the thumbs up. There we go. Good. Universal thumbs up. All right. So I mentioned that record trigger flows, they fire when a DML event takes place on the platform. What's a little more complex than that? We have this concept called the save order of execution. Now, the save order of execution are the series of events that take place imperatively in the background when data is changed on the Salesforce platform. Right? So, for example, here we have a user, right? Our user is wearing a pink blouse and purple skirt. They hit save on an account record. That request goes up to the internet, and Salesforce interprets that, oh, that's a save, right? They're inserting a new record. So we kick off this save order of execution where we have what we're calling the bracelet, right? It's that whole ring and each dot on it, I'm calling beads. So those are the series of events where we go through the first series of events before the data is initially saved to the database. Then a whole bunch of other beads have to take place before the data is permanently committed to the database. Now, just make sure we understand the difference between save and commit. Save means your data is written to the database. It's there. If it's a new record, a Salesforce ID is issued. If it's an existing record, system fields are updated. Commit means, okay, now that data is permanent in the database. If you want to remove it or change it, we have to perform another operation. All right, cool. So, and just make sure, when I kept saying DML, database manipulation language. So if you're familiar with relational databases, we're talking about insert, update, delete, undelete. Then in Salesforce, we have upsert, which is a combination of insert and update in a single operation. And we have merge, which is a combination of update and delete in a single operation. So when we perform a save operation, that is insert and update. Right, so now let me bring in, where does our record trigger flows fit into the bracelet? So please observe the green and the purple dot. These are two steps where our record trigger flows will take place. The green dot is before the initial save to the database. The purple dot at the end of the bracelet is our after record trigger flow. Okay. Now, analogous, we have our pro code solution, right? If we were writing Apex code, which I suspect a lot of folks on this call have, notice that our Apex triggers happen at similar places, right? The green dot is sort of the same place where our record trigger flows kick in, our before record trigger flows, but notice that our after Apex triggers kick in just after the initial save. It's a different location than our after record trigger flows, right? And that's important because the beads following the after Apex trigger, those include workflow and process. In order for, I'm just going to go back a slide. In order for us to be able to deprecate workflow and process, we need to have our after record trigger flows take place after those operations are performed in the same order of execution. That's why it works. So we noticed that there were two types of triggers when you're either in our record trigger flow or Apex trigger. We have the before trigger and the after trigger. And it doesn't necessarily mean a point in time. It means what can we do to the data that we have. So in a before trigger, we tend to use those types of triggers to validate our data before the initial save to the database. We could change the data coming in to the database. In our after trigger, we tend to use those to perform operations on other objects in our org. So, for example, right, if we had this use case, when a new account has been created, we want to automatically post a chatter message with a link to an account record to the associated account manager. We have to make a decision. Do we want this to be a before trigger or an after trigger? Well, knowing what we do about the save order of execution for a new account, we need to make sure that we have the account ID, the Salesforce ID. Who creates Salesforce IDs? Salesforce does. When the account is saved to the database, which means we have to hit that save point on the save order of execution bracelet, which tells us this use case must be an after. And that's how we make the decisions as to which trigger to create. All right, so when we're creating our record trigger flow, very similar to creating Apex triggers, we have to specify which object is this trigger going to be on. Then we specify, will it be a create or will it be an update? Now, I know we're using the word create here. Create is basically the DML insert. So create and insert, the same thing. Flow actually used to be a tool that another vendor wrote that Salesforce bought and included into Salesforce, right? Included into the platform. That's how come you see some of the language is a little different. Right? We could create, we could have when a record is created or updated, and we could also have a delete record trigger flow. We specify our entry criteria and we create our entry criteria. Now, one of the differences between creating record trigger flows and Apex triggers, you may, since you've been studying as developers, we have a rule with Apex triggers, one object, one trigger. That's different with our record trigger flows, right? When you're writing your Apex triggers, you tend to have the trigger call a trigger handler. Well, in record trigger flows, the trigger handler is the flow explorer. So you write a bunch of triggers. You're basically writing trigger handlers. The flow explorer is selecting which one is going to be fired, and you number them. So you can have multiple record trigger flows on an object. In fact, you need to in order to make them easy to refactor, and you're able to number the order that they go in, similar to writing a trigger handler in Apex. So the paradigm changes a little bit. All right, so when we're coming up with the record trigger flows, the language is a little off, right? If you want to create a before save, we have to create a fast field update. Why? Because Salesforce changed the name of the before save to fast field update last summer release, right when we wrote our course. So we had to change all the slides. And they're referring to after record trigger flows as actions and related records. So fast field update, that's your before. action and related records, that is your after. Now, there's different functionality that we have available in the different types of flows. In our before, right, in our fast field update, the only DML operations we can perform are an update and a get. So get record is basically performing a SOQL query. And then we have our specific logic, right? Assignment, decision, loops, collection, sort, that sort of thing. In our after record trigger flows, we have access to all of our functionality, right? All of our DML events, create, update, delete, all of our logic, and we're also able to call subflows and Salesforce actions, invocable, Apex, that sort of thing, right? So really, Salesforce is trying to force you to really do only record validation, right? Fast field updating in your before record trigger flow. Now we need a way to get our data into our flow interview, right? Our flow interview is an instance of a running flow. Now in Apex, right, who remembers what we used to get data into our Apex triggers, right? That was trigger.new, right? That was a collection of data. Well, in record trigger flows, our flow interviews work on one record at a time. So we have a global variable called $record. $record will contain every field that is in the specific record. So let's say we're creating an account. Let's say your user goes into the account page. They create a brand new account record. You have a trigger written on a record trigger flow written on the account object. They hit save. When you're in that record trigger flow, when you inspect $record, that's going to have every field in the account object populated with data. Also, what's good about the global variable is it has references to parent, to hierarchy objects, to objects that are up to 10 relationships away. So if I'm working with an account, right, one parent of an account is user, right? So I have access to the fields in the related user record, right? The parent user record. If I had a custom object that was a parent of account, I'd have access to that data. So you could traverse the relationship of the data from $record. Also, one of the things that we're able to do with $record, especially in a fast field update, is we're able to make changes to the data or add new data to some of the fields in $record before it gets written to the database. And by doing that, we don't have to perform a new DML operation. We're just like if we are making changes to data in trigger.new in a before trigger, right? We don't make any, we don't have to perform DML, right? Those changes think about it, we're in the bracelet of save order of execution. The next step after our before triggers is the save to the database, right? So I just want to do a bit of a demonstration, right? What does that mean, right? So here's the use case. Every time we change a record in Salesforce, right, that performs a DML event, it kicks off the save order of execution. I want to demonstrate what happens when we change $record in a before trigger versus what happens when we change $record in an after trigger, right? So let me bring up, just happen to have an org open here. All right. There it is. Excuse me. So this is a scratch org that I generated earlier today, right? And everything that you recognize here, we have a bunch of accounts. Now I want to show you two triggers that I have on account. Okay. This is a fast field update, right? A before trigger on the account object. And this is only going to run when a record is created, right? Inserted into the object. And all this is doing, this is an assignment element, right? An assignment element is an element we use to basically assign data to a variable. Okay. Here is $record, our global variable. And notice that, excuse me. Let me just show you what this field is. I created a field on the account object called before after demo message. Right? Just a text field for the purposes of this demo. And in this before trigger, all I'm going to do is I'm writing this message, before trigger message. Okay? And that's just text that's going to be added to $record field called before after demo message. That's it, simple text field. And this is active. Similarly, I have an after trigger on the same object, right? Object is account, right? Record is created, right? Action and related record means it's an action. And again, all I have is one assignment. Okay? And in that assignment, I'm taking the same field, right? $record dot before after demo message, but I'm writing a different message. After trigger message. Right? So let's think about this before I run the demo. Right? Let's get to an object here. Okay, I'm going to create a new account. All right, so let's see what would be a good name for an account. Pizza. Now, this is the field I was talking about before after demo message. When I go to save this record, right? It's a DML event. It's going to be an insert. Remember, when we're creating an insert, it kicks off the save order of execution. My before trigger is going to fire, and my after trigger is going to fire. So I want you to think about, before I hit save, what message is going to be written to before after demo message? Will it be before trigger message from my before trigger? Or will it be the after trigger message from my after trigger? So everyone think about it for a second. Okay. And let's see. Actually, we have a chat here too. So you could actually put your thoughts into the, go ahead.
People say after trigger message, after.
Everyone's saying after.
Everyone says after.
Everyone says after. Great.
Yeah,
right.
Someone said before.
Someone said
Maybe
before?
Anna said before, yes.
All right. So we have a couple befores, but we have mostly after. All right. This is exciting. 3, 2, 1. Look at that. It's before.
Before. Yay, Juliana, you were first.
But let's understand what's happening. And this is what's important. So over here, let me get my pen. Oh, where's my pen? Okay, over here, we're writing the message to $record. I'm just going to abbreviate. Right?
Someone just said.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Someone just said before, then refresh, and then after.
Well, what we saw was that we only had the before message, because what happens was we changed $record, and then it got saved to the database, right? So we hit our save step. But over here, when we updated $record, right, it keeps going. We don't have another save, right? In the save order of execution, the only things that happen next is the commit. So we've never taken that data and written it to the database. We've already passed the save point. That's how come the after message didn't get written to the record. And that's the difference between $record, changing $record in a before versus changing $record in the after. Does anyone have any thoughts on what can I do in my after trigger if I wanted to save that data to the database?
Any thoughts, guys? You can
Any
also just talk. Yeah, you don't have to write.
Yeah.
Roman just texted add save element.
There we go. Absolutely. I'm going to add, it's not a save element, but if I do update record, and let's say update field, right? I want to use the ID and all the fields from a record in a collection. I'm going to use it from $record. If I hit done, now I'm updating this. I'm going to save this. I'm going to, boom, boom, we're going to activate it. Now, let's look what happens. I'm going to create a new account. Let's call this, well, what goes good with pizza? Well, I was just in Germany and they're going to tell me beer. We're going to hit
That's what
save.
I wanted to tell you.
And now it says after. Because what happened was we added an update here. So now, since we performed an update, this is creating basically another mini save order of execution off of that. And there's a save going on right over here. So now we're saving to the database. So that's how we can still make changes to the record, but now we have to explicitly perform the DML event. Good. Okay. All right, so let's continue. I want to talk about a couple other things before we get to QA. Now, when we're making, so we talked about inserting, right? And we had a global variable $record that had all the new data coming into the record trigger flow. Well, just like in Apex triggers, right? If we're performing an update, sometimes we need to know what the old data is, right? We need to make decisions based on the old data. Like, let's say we had an opportunity, right? And in an opportunity, let's say every time that opportunity stage was changed to closed one, we wrote a record to the commission system, right? So we have that trigger on our opportunity. Good. So a user goes in and we change the stage of an opportunity to closed one, and we write a record to the commission system. But now let's say somebody goes back into that record and they change a different field. They don't change the stage field, they change the description field, right? And they hit save. Is a DML operation taking place? Absolutely, we're performing an update. Will our trigger run? Yes, it will, because we have a trigger on the object. So it's at this point, we have to check to see which field changed. Now, since our trigger is only interested in running business logic when the stage field changes, we would compare the content of the stage field in $record to the contents of the stage field in $record prior, right? Comparing the old to the new. If those fields change, that means, okay, the stage changed, let's perform our business logic. But in our use case, where someone just changed the description field, right? $record prior and $record for stage field would be the same. We would bypass our logic. So again, it's important to be aware that we have the previous values. Also, a lot of times we like to combine, create an update into the same trigger, right? I mean, we do that with Apex triggers. Sometimes we want to do that with a record trigger flow. However, we may have a step where we want to perform something different when it's a create record, as opposed to performing business logic when it's an update. If we look at $record prior and check to see if it's null, when that global variable is null, that means there's no previous value, which means this is an create event, right? DML insert. Right, so I'm going to finish off with just one more demo on how we could create an after record trigger flow to change a value. How we're going to create a record trigger flow to actually make a change to a value given a use case. So let's say when an opportunity stage is changed to close one, we want to check if the amount is greater than or equal to $1 million, add a message to the description field. Right? So that's our use case. And let me show you what this looks like. Okay, so let me close some of this out. Okay. And here is the flow. Right? We're putting a record trigger flow on opportunity. I've decided that I want to have one, I want to have a single record trigger flow for create and update. So I'm specifying that. Now I want to specify my criteria, right? When do I want to run this business logic? Well, when the amount is greater than or equal to $1 million, we specify that here, and the stage name equals closed one. All right, so this will prevent the trigger from running on different use cases. So now I'm going to hit done here, and let's look at the logic. So I want to check to see, hey, is this an insert? Am I creating a record? Because if I'm creating a brand new record, that means I always want to add the message. So I have this branch over here, and this is a technique in record trigger flows, which just tries, it basically says, all right, this is connecting over here. So it puts sort of this shortcut in place. Let me show you what this decision looks like, right? What I like to do is I like to give my decisions a name that's meaningful as to what it's doing. And then with our decisions, we have our different outcomes. So the first outcome is I want to write a message. When do I want to write a message? Well, $record prior is null. Remember, this is addressing the use case. If it is an insert, if we're creating a new record, I want to branch to the element that's going to be updating the field. So I'm checking to see if this is null, and true, meaning the way you read this is record $record prior, is it null? If it's true, we're going to go down this branch. Otherwise, we go down the default branch. I don't like using anything that says default. I like putting a label in, just telling me what it is. It's self-documenting. No, as opposed to Apex, where you could write comments, you can't put comments in your record trigger flows. So you have to do your best with naming the different branches, right? So if it's an insert, we're going to go straight to this add message. Let me just show you what this assignment looks like before I go back to this branch. Right? We saw this before. Since this is we're doing a fast field update, we could just make a change to our $record. So all I'm doing is the description field I'm adding, oh, this is a formula, which I pre-wrote. I'll show you what that formula is, but I'm adding some text message. Now, if it's not an insert, and if it's an update, I want to check to see, hey, was it the stage field that changed? Because even though my entry criteria, right, if we remember the entry criteria, right, I'm only coming into this if the stage name equals closed one, I want to make sure that that was the field that actually changed, not some other field. So in my decision, I'm checking, right? Did the stage change? Right? I'm enabling my decision. So the stage change branch, I'm checking. $record stage. And another way of checking, as opposed to maybe comparing it to $record prior, is there's a built-in function called isChange. I'm checking, has that field changed? If it's yes, we're going to go down this branch. Otherwise, I'm going to go my default branch. Right? If the stage did not change, I don't want to do anything. If the stage did change, I want to add the message. Now, before I run this, I just want to show you what that formula looked like. What's really nice in your record trigger flows, or actually in working with flows, you could write formulas to sort of offload some of your work. Like, for example, I wanted to write a text that said, well done on, right, $1 million in sales. So I use your basic tools that you've learned when you're writing formulas, right? I'm converting $record amount, right? It's a number, I'm converting it to text, and I'm concatenating that with the ampersand. That's all that formula does. And so it's more dynamic. Now, what's really cool about record trigger flows is it has a built-in debug tool, right? We're good engineers. We always know we just don't write something and move it to production. We want to debug it. So I want to show you how we're going to debug this. Now, one of the odd things when you're working with record trigger flows, at least for now, is if you want to debug this, the data already has to exist in the org, right? But that's okay, because normally we're doing this in a sandbox or a or a scratch org. Notice that there's a sort of a unit testing beta tool that's almost ready that will allow us to create test data directly in our record trigger flow, but it's not there yet. So let me show you how we're going to test this. So let me click debug. And yeah, I don't want to, since I didn't make changes, I'm just going to debug it. Now, since this is a record trigger flow that's written on create or update, first I want to test the created path, right? So I have to search for an opportunity that I already came up with. And I believe, let me go to my opportunities. I created one already, right? I created a pizza op, go figure, opportunity that's going to meet our criteria, right? That's not going to meet our criteria, right? It's prospecting, right? So that's one that doesn't meet our criteria yet. Let me show you the one that does meet our criteria. It is the closed one, right? That's the one I want to test first. So it meets our criteria, right? It's over $1 million, it's $1 million, and it's closed one. Let's look what happens when I test with that. As a create, I'm going to look for pizza op 2. Now let's think about it. It meets our criteria. We're going to see what happens if it, if this runs when the record's created. Our expectation is it's going to go down the path where it's going to write the message. I click run, and whoops. Right, we're going to look at our conditions here. Let's see. I guess I have to save this in order to see my path. So let me do this again. I'm going to, right, gonna debug. We have pizza op 2. There we go. So what's happening is we have, this is sort of a subset of what's in a debug log, right? Your Apex developers, you're familiar with the debug log. We have a subset of what's going on there. So we're seeing some information that the trigger was started and it ran on a specific opportunity. It met our entry criteria. So it got past this point to this decision, right? We're testing an insert. So we're going down our branch. Notice that this is orange and that when it got here, we did write the message, right? So we're saying, okay, we're adding the message and our message is well done on, $1 million in sales. So this passed our test. But what's really good is that we're not making persistent changes to the database. Now let's take a look at how this runs if I am doing an update, right? So I'm going to debug again. I'm going to choose update, but I don't want the pizza one. I want an opportunity that doesn't meet the criteria, right? So this doesn't meet the criteria. And what we're able to do now is I'm able to change the value. So now we will have data that's in $ record, which is the original, right? Which is the original opportunity. Then we're going to have the changed one, which is going to be closed, right? Which is going to have the closed one value. Now, when I run this, we see, okay, it started, right? Was it in insert? No, it's an update, right? Because I chose update. Did the stage change? Well, here we go. We're seeing that our condition is met. It was changed, right? It was changed to closed one. So we go to write the message. So what we saw here is, right, a way, how we're going to debug these tools. Now, if I activate this and go to actually create an opportunity, right, we would go in, I'm just gonna see if I can clone this just because, right, us developers were lazy when typing in new data. If we could find a shortcut, we will. So I'm gonna clone this. I'm gonna put this as pizza opportunity 3, right? And I'm going to leave that as closed one. So let's see if this writes a message to the description. We're going to hit save. And here it is, right? So our user test worked. All right, cool. All right, so again, there's so much more we could dig into when we do our flow training. At this point, we're spending 2 days on going into different use cases, screen flows, how we're going to communicate out when changes are made. We dive deeper into platform events. What we did here, hopefully, was give you a nice overview and just say, hey, where do record trigger flows fit in when I'm trying to come up with a solution as a developer, right? So now let's say, you're given a use case where there's like 5 tasks you need to do, but you see 3 of them could be done with a fast field update with a record trigger flow. Great, you offload that to your admins, right? You have them write those record trigger flows. And then you concentrate on the heavy lift that you need to do. Maybe it's an integration project you're working with, or maybe you're doing some sort of complex automation that just exceeds what you can do with your record trigger flows. Right? So having said that, what questions do we have?
Thank you, Stuart. Hey guys, if you have questions, unmute yourself and try to speak. If you need any help with translation, I can do it for you. Also, yeah.
May I?
Please.
Sure.
If nobody, yeah. So 3 questions here.
Okay.
Yeah. First of all, I hear you said that if you have an admin, just give this job for the flow development for the admin. So from your point, from your perspective, you think that the main developer is not is not going to develop the flow. I mean, developers in code developers.
It really depends on the shop. There's some organizations where you'll have your admin staff and you'll have your developer staff. If you're designing a solution, you may say, if you have that type of organization, you know what? Why don't you do this? Because my sprint has so many, I'm so late, I'm so bogged down on my sprint, I don't have enough time to write these flows. So there are certain flows you could offload to an admin. On the other hand, you may say, you know what? Within this sprint, I do have time to write these. So you decide, okay, I'm going to write them. The selling point of some of the flows that got written, meaning that an admin can write them. As to what you decide to do, that really depends on your workload.
Yeah, so in that terms, but Salesforce followed the strategy and force us, I mean developers here, to use the no code first, to have a favor for the no code rather than go with Apex. And for us as developers here, I think if I have some task, it can from the coder, from the engineer, software engineer, it's a way better and easier to go with Apex and do this job with Apex trigger rather than bother with flows and to sync other things. So, but Salesforce still follow the strategy and force us to go with flows. What is your opinion here? Do we need to come down with Salesforce strategy on other, or still keep with the traditional code in here?
Well, it has to do with managing the governor limits, right? So let's say, for example, you come up with a solution and you decide, I'm going to go with a full Apex solution, right? And then all of a sudden you start coming up with governor limit issues for whatever the use case is. So governor limits, too many DML calls, too many SOCL calls, maybe you're exceeding the time in the CPU, right? Those are different types of governor limits. So then you start saying, what are some, I've properly bulkified my code, so that's not an issue. I see I'm making a lot of changes in a before trigger, right? That now the strategy is, okay, what if I offload those changes in my before trigger and put them in a fast field update flow? The fast field update flows, they're optimized to run faster than your Apex code. So that's a technique to avoid hitting some of your CPU limits that you may make. Also, the amount of time with unit testing gets reduced because you don't necessarily have to unit test those fast field updates. So again, it's techniques of managing governor limits. That's what it comes down to. Also, when you have, every time we have a release, right, best practices say, okay, we have 3 releases a year. You want to do a regression test of all your Apex code. You don't have to do a regression test of your record trigger flows because it's a no-code solution. So that shortens the life cycle of any sort of regression testing you're going to do. So it's those things that we balance.
Okay, so one more point here. So about the speed, you say that before record trigger flow are way faster than Apex.
Yes.
Do we have any some kind of comparison here or some discovering on that, or just that it's a statement of the Salesforce?
It's in the documentation. There's, I wish I had it, link in with me, or I could send afterward. There's an architect document that was written by the Salesforce engineers that actually did studies to back that up with tests. If maybe Teresa could ping me after this, and I'll share the link. It's on our Trailhead site. But no, all that stuff is documented. We just don't assert that. And I wouldn't assert it if it wasn't true, because I've been writing code since
At least, yeah, we
1981.
may check and to write some small.
You should. You absolutely should.
And one more point here about bulkification. As far as we know, we have a record, which is a single record, and we rely on the fact that Salesforce take on their own the efficient way to bulkify when we have a list of, let's say, updates. But going with a record trigger flow, we'll lose lose that convenient way of trigger map we have when we, let's say, when we have an insert or update for the similar list of records, which can be related between. So we need to, let's say, we need to query some related data, which can be shrinked if we can go over the full list of the records here. So if we have 10 accounts inserted and they all are related to the, let's say, the same contract, and we need to query the contract. In that way, we can do it with a single socle if we will have full list of the records. But in Flow, we can do that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. If you need to do complex analysis of collections or use a map structure, you absolutely go to Apex. What a lot of companies are doing now is they have their Apex developers writing invocable Apex that is called as an action from your after record trigger flows, where you do those heavy lifts. Absolutely. So yeah, many use cases, record trigger flows are not the solution for everything by any means, but they do solve a lot of problems. Now, in terms of bulkification, the way record trigger flows handle bulkification is they have automatic bulkification. So if let's say you're performing an insert on 10 records, 10 account records, and you have a record trigger flow on the account object. What happens is one flow transaction is created, and that flow transaction will create 10 flow interviews. So 10 interviews running the 10 flows, and then they have bulkification points where Salesforce will automatically bulkify the DML calls, the database calls, the actions. So Salesforce does take care of bulkification for you in the flow transaction. So you can process more than one record, but it's the transaction will break the, we'll take the 10 records that came in that use case and create 10 interviews and bulkify at certain points.
Okay, and if we have, let's say, 200 records inserted, as we have in the trigger, but we need to query the specific, let's say, contract for each account. In that case, if we will go for querying each contract for each record, it can hit the 100 socle limit.
Yeah.
In that case.
Oh yeah. So again, for complex operations, you're always going to go to Apex.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But what's really cool about screen-based flows is that, and we were doing this also, you can embed Lightning Web Components to perform some of your more complex operations. I don't know, are you guys studying Lightning Web Components? Or is that you should?
I think they will. Yeah, they will.
It's super cool. We had a project where me and Andres, I don't know who was on this call that sat through Andres' session. We had a project where we needed to have people log on to Salesforce and go to the digital experience. Digital experience is when you're using Salesforce as the back end of your website, right? Where you're not using the Salesforce UI, you're writing your own UI. And we needed them to, we wrote a product on the digital experience, but we had to have the users use regular Salesforce licenses because of a problem with an integration. But we didn't want them to log into Salesforce. So we had a login flow. Login flow is a special type of flow that will run when you go to authenticate into Salesforce, where the flow came up, if it was a certain profile, and we had embedded a Lightning Web Component to see where were they logging in from, and to take that information and redirect them directly to the Lightning experience. So we did that by embedding Lightning web components into the login flow. So you're going to see, when you start getting into UI work, ways where you can combine the screen flows with your Lightning web components, and again, come up with tools that, okay, maybe we can't write all the wizards that my company needs, but here, I'm the developer. Let me give you this tool set, admin, of the components you're going to need to put into your flow so you can perform these operations. So really where the trend is heavy lifting for Apex, write some invocable Apex so that could be used in flows, and find a way to work them together where they make sense, of course. Good question, sir. If you were in the room with me, I'd give you Salesforce swag, but we're 5,000 miles away. Who else has questions?
Also, you have another question in the chat. I don't know, Stuart, can you see the chat?
All right, let me open it up.
Yeah, because it's a long question.
Oh my, okay, let's see. Okay, for Apex triggers, Salesforce recommends to have only one trigger on an object. What is the best practice for flows, in your opinion? Let me see if I have this here. So right now, the best practice in flow is you don't need to have one trigger per object. Let me see if I have this. I was working on a demo to show you how that works. All right, so basically when you have, so in Apex triggers, right, you write your trigger and then you have your trigger handler. And in your trigger handler, you say, all right, if it's an insert, if it's an after insert, form function A, if it's an after update, perform method B, and so on. So your trigger handler sort of acts as like the traffic hub, guiding where does your logic go. Think about the Flow Trigger Explorer as your trigger handler, right? So this is the this is the trigger, right? And this is handling all your logic. So hey, the first thing that's going to happen, I'm going to go to this trigger, right? The account pizza business trigger. Then the second one, I'm able to number the order. So think of this as a giant case statement in your Apex trigger handler, right? So I'm having multiple triggers on my object, multiple flow triggers, right? I'm handling the order in which they're going to execute, and then I have entry criteria that will control whether or not they will execute or not. So it's the opposite. It's okay to have multiple triggers on an object. Use the Flow Trigger Explorer to number the order that they're going to go in, and be explicit with your entry criteria so that your specific business logic will only run when you expect it. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, we wouldn't want to put it into one flow because it gets unwieldy. It's too complicated to manage if it's all in one flow. So let's say I have 10 things I need to do when a record changes on an account, right? 10 flows, right? Number the order and have the entry criteria. So only the specific flow trigger will run when necessary.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. I understand. This that you described, this Flow Trigger Explorer, it was one of the options I mentioned there. And so just wanted to know your opinion. Thank you very much, and thanks for a great lecture.
And I'm actually, if you link in with me, I every now and then I write different articles on topics. And this is one I was going to put together with graphics to help folks understand it. So stay tuned. More questions. These are great questions.
Hi, Stuart.
Hi.
Yeah. Follow up to your answer. A small one. Do you post them on LinkedIn, or where is the best to follow you?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Let me go back to my. I try to post articles often. Of course, as you all know, time it's a little difficult.
Yeah,
But
limited resource.
I'm going to post it there. Also, check out Salesforce Ben. He's a great resource.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
Thank you.
This is me. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is like, first one probably, is it like a good practice because like flows for a long time wasn't like kind of not the best tool of choice because Apex was kind of preferable. But since flows evolved really well, is it like currently a good practice, for example, to start using them on existing orgs?
Yes.
Or, so even if, for example, it's okay currently already to mix Apex and flows at the same org and they wouldn't like interfere or something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it is a best practice because right now, up until before Flow got mature,
Mhm.
I did not like using the tool.
Mhm.
It just wasn't I didn't think it was a good tool, but Salesforce has put so much effort into it to optimize its performance to replace workflow and process. And again, you know, the selling point, the reason Flow is good is, you know, it's optimized. You don't have to regression test. You know, it's always going, you know, every release, it's always going to work. And you're able to offload some of the developer work to the admins. I mean, granted, you know, we cost a lot, developers.
Mhm.
You know, and if you can offload some of the work to the admin team, you can get more done. It's a very symbiotic relationship. And like I said, the trend now is developers are writing basically plugins, right? Invocable Apex that is being used in Flow, so that now you're focusing on, you know, the real challenges that the developer world has, you know, like processing data, comparing data, and you're making it available, saying, all right, I'm creating this tool set. Now a less technical team could use the tool set, and now I could, you know, have these flows in place.
So the best practice is currently is to try to implement invocable methods and then invoke them from the flows.
Again, it's really, you know, that's a trend that some companies are doing. It's really going to be up to, I haven't explored that yet. I like the idea of it, but, you know, it depends on the use case. If you have a problem that is so complex, you may just want to stay directly with an Apex solution, right?
Mhm.
If maybe you were doing a call out that was pretty common, that might be a use case for an invocable action. Or let's say you were comparing, you needed something in a map to bring you back some, you know, aggregation. That might be a use case for an invocable action. It really depends on the use case. I don't want to make a sweeping generalization.
Okay, cool. Okay, one last thing then is
Please.
like, what would be? I think it's still kind of hard, to sum up in your head, like because you have like flows automation, for example, on one hand, and Apex trigger handlers on another, and it's kind of, you still like the Flow Explorer simplified overview for flows, but you still kind of, it's hard to match them together so that you know that this part is automated, for example, with flows, and this part of logic is automated with Apex triggers. So it's kind of harder to know what is happening in the system, if it's in my mind.
You know, I agree with you. I mean, sometimes it's difficult. The way I look at a use case is, let's say I'm starting, let's say it's a new project, right? It's a new org. And I see, oh, okay, here's a handful of requests that came. You know, I need, you know, these fields changed when an account is created. I need these calculations met and this integration implemented when an opportunity takes place. You know, you look at the whole picture and then you say, all right, what's the best way to approach this? And also, what's the quickest, right? Right. When you're in industry, you know, what's driving you? The deadline. I mean, that's the, Yeah, I mean, if it was up to us developers, we'd take forever to write our code so it could be the perfect piece of code. But I've been in this industry since I had hair down to here, and that's unfortunately not the reality. The reality is get it in, get it quick, get it working. And if you could manage your deadline with offloading stuff in flow, but so you have enough time to write the proper Apex that you need and the proper unit tests, then one, you've managed governor limits, you've reduced the time of your software life cycle, and you're hitting your goals, and that's ultimately what we're looking for in this ecosystem.
Mhm. Okay, got you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Sorry, one more question about, you just mentioned the governor limits. Do we have some convenient way to see, same way like we have in Dev Console, when we get some summary for the limits consumption after the execution, when we can see the sockles, DMLs, and API calls and other things? Do we have something like that for flows to see, especially when we have in the same org Apex and start using flows, and we hit the limits and we need to find the way where we need to search for the main issue in Apex side or in the flow side? Who consume the most of the limits, maybe sockles or DMLs and other things, and to look for that place?
Yes. So the answer is, if you set up a user trace, you will get a debug log. And since this is a flow transaction, it will generate the same messages that your triggers will fire. So you will get a debug log. If you get a call from a user, hey, apparently the trigger's failing when I'm saving this opportunity, you can set up a user trace on that user. So a debug log will get created, and then you can track it. So you will see governor limits being used, if they're being exceeded, what calls are being made, are you calling Apex, all that. So yes, it does show up in the debug log, just like your Apex.
But it will be the common debug log for the both for the Apex triggers and for flows. And it means it will be transaction-wise logs,
Yes,
not
yes.
separately for Apex and for flow.
That's correct. It will be together in the same.
So anyway, we are not able to see which part of the environment consume more. I mean, in contrary from the flow and Apex.
Oh, well, I mean, it is one transaction.
Yeah.
Right. So it's, it is one transaction. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you could probably, you would have to search the log. I mean, remember, each event has a unique tag. So if you start searching on the flow tags, you'll have to do some calculation. But no, it doesn't break it up. Oh, this much was done in Apex. This was done in this was done in flow. This was done in other things.
Because just that's the point here. It's my first question was when we have developers and admins, because on my experience was the same case, like this case, when we have a 100 sockle limit, and we have part of developers which were developing triggers, Apex triggers and handlers, and was a part of admins, but not admins, it was Salesforce consultant who was developing the flows. Actually, in project, we have the issue with the limits, and the project management asked, hey guys, just fix it. And then was starting as a trade between developers and admins, who is gonna to shrink their limits. Because actually, from my side as a developer, was hey guys, in these transactions there was only 39 sockles from the Apex, and so I suppose that the rest of the sockles was consumed by your flows. Just take care of that. Oh no, I can do nothing here. Just reduce your flows from 39, let's say, to 20, maybe. So in that way, so we need to have maybe in that case we need to have some kind of wage or other things for the code and no code things, just to compare the consumptions of sockles, and not only sockles, but I mean in all governor limits we have. Because in that case we don't have the useful convenient tool to point which place we need to optimize first. I mean Apex or flow. Or maybe we need to just transfer some flow to Apex and make it more optimize and maybe to combine some flows into maybe several flows into one trigger handler, and then it will be consuming less governance. But we don't have this tool yet. Yeah.
No, tool doesn't exist. I mean, you know, that's managing governor limits. I mean, that's one of the challenges working on this platform. I mean, you know, it's easy to, you know, when you're looking at your Apex code, you know, you follow best practices. Oh, you've managed your governor limits. With Flow, well, there's the challenge because you have folks with a background that isn't necessarily, you know, a developer. So you may open up a Flow and say, oh my gosh, you're doing a get in a loop. Don't do that. So yeah, it's a challenge. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. More questions?
Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. And I heard something like Salesforce is going to force us as developers to write some tests on flows. Am I right? Okay,
so if you want to, if you need to move an active flow to a record trigger flow to production, you need unit tests, Apex unit tests. Now, and my thoughts on that is if I have record trigger flows, and this is where I catch a lot of grief from folks right now, I think the best way to test any trigger, be it an Apex trigger or a record trigger flow, is with Apex unit tests. So only required if you want to move the flow is active when you are deploying either with chain sets or SFDX. I think best practice, you should have unit tests with Apex unit tests with the flow. Salesforce doesn't require that. What's in beta right now is a flow declarative unit test. They tried getting it for summer release, but they couldn't. So hopefully winter, safe harbor.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Any other questions? But Teresa, this is a great bunch. I'm so glad
I told
to meet
you.
everyone.
Yay.
Huh.
Yeah, we have a very nice group of people this time on the course.
All right. Good. Well, if there's no other questions, I think that's what I have. I mean,
Okay, well, let me ask one other question.
Please go ahead.
It would be also really great if you have like any like, can you recommend any resources or maybe your own posts for best practices on flows?
Here we go. There's a couple. The best resource I could recommend is this site over here, Unofficial SF. All the Salesforce product managers, engineers, direct everyone here. This is sort of a user-generated site that everyone goes to for like best practices, not just with Flow, but NestBest Actions, Orchestrator. There's a lot of plugins that you could look at for Flow. I will put this link in the window. This, I think, is the best place for resources. It's better than the Salesforce resources. Our resources are little. The product team is moving so fast, the documentation can't keep up with it. So this is good. Also, a place I go to a lot is on our Trailblazer site. There's a tag, hash flow, where I look at like what use cases people are having, what problems, and I try to suggest solutions, and I see what solutions are coming up. So that's a good. Let me see if I'm logged into Trailhead. I could show you that. But Trailhead, the discussion groups where people are. There we go. Where people are looking for stuff, looking to try to solve problems. Let's see if I can find that. Trails, community. There we go. Groups. Oh no, topics. There we go. Topics. I've been like on the road for the last month, so I haven't looked at it in a long time. This is a great topic in the Trailhead site. I'm here all the time where people are having real world problems and folks are coming in and suggesting solutions. And it gives you an opportunity to learn, how is this being used? What are people doing with it? How are they solving their problems? Yeah, here, I'll put this, well, yeah, so this is just, if you look for the hash flow topic in the Trailblazer community.
Cool.
So as an Apex developer, I must focus on administering admins to develop. There, you know what? We're all in this together. So, if an admin, so the question is, so as an Apex developer, I must focus on administering admins to develop flows. You know what? The ones that feel comfortable, you're going to have a great experience with them. The ones who don't, the admins right now are very afraid of writing flows. So I don't think you're going to have that much problem, because this is a programming tool. It's a click developer tool, and there's a skill set the admins don't have. So they're not going to be taking your job or anything, and they're nervous about it, but there's nothing wrong with, a good developer should understand the security model, right? A good developer should be able to sit in for an admin, to know how the platform works, because you're able to come up with better solutions when you're writing code. I'm a much better Salesforce developer now because I've really embraced the Salesforce security model and all things declarative. And again, that's what's different about, working on this platform. And I've been a C++ programmer, Java developer, COBOL, DB2, CICS, all this wacky stuff. Just became a JavaScript developer. Love Lightning Web Components. Oh, I wish I could do that a lot more, but I'm Mr. Flow now at Trailhead Academy, and it's interesting, and it's just all the different tools, and the more tools we know as a developer, it makes us more valuable, more interesting, and makes us have more flexible solutions, and that's really the value we bring to the industry. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. All right, great. Well, pleasure meeting everyone. Hopefully we'll find a way to come back, but feel free to link in with me if questions come